Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gabriel Egan, and I'm Professor of Shakespeare Studies at De Montfort University, and I'm Director of the Centre for Textual Studies and Director of the English Research Institute. I'm also the Director of this new research theme, one of the 5 themes that the university has developed. I'm Director of the research theme Living in a Digital Society. And I'd like to welcome you to this, our first roundtable discussion of this theme. We have 4 speakers for you today, and they will each speak about their research in relation to our topic. I will chair, and then I will get them into a discussion amongst themselves, amongst us, about aspects arising from their research and our research theme. And then I will open up the field to questions from the floor. So let me tell you what the starting premise of our discussion today is. It's the idea that digital methods have the potential to lower the costs of technologies that are otherwise largely unaffordable in developing nations, and that pursuing research in this area throws up significant ethical and practical matters, and it's those that our roundtable will discuss. So let me flesh that out a bit for you. I think it's safe to say that all of our digital technologies were developed in the advanced industrial economies of the Western and Northern hemispheres, and they've spread from there to the rest of the world. The author, William Gibson, famously remarked that the future is already here, he said. It's just not very evenly distributed yet. I'm slightly paraphrasing. But that idea of unevenness of distribution of technology is, I think, most apparent when we compare developing nations with the industrialized West. So I thought that for the first of our research theme roundtables, we'd look at this matter of new technologies in relation to developing nations. And by the way, that expression, developing nations, may itself be one that we want to question. It doesn't necessarily quite represent the truly uneven progress of various social and economic trends across the world. I'm going to use it for now as a shorthand, but if people want to critique that notion of developing nations, then we can. A question I would like us to get to, though, is the idea that perhaps there's something peculiar to digital technologies that makes them unlike previous examples of new technologies spreading from the industrialized West to the developing world. Our speakers will speak individually for a few minutes about their research, and then I'm going to open it, as I say, to a wider discussion amongst ourselves and then out to the listeners to ask questions as well. So I think talking amongst ourselves, us delivering our talks, will take us to around about 1:30, and then we'll open it to discussion from the floor with a scheduled close of this session at 2 p.m. So let me introduce the first of our 4 speakers. It's Dr. Caroline Khene, who is Senior Lecturer in Information Systems and Information Society and Doctoral Program Coordinator in the Centre for Computing and Social Responsibility at De Montfort's Faculty of Computing, Engineering and Media. And she has considerable expertise in development in Africa and the social issues connected with what we used to call, do we still call, ICT, Information and Communication Technology. So I'd like to invite Dr. Khene, first of all, to come on screen and give us her talk about her research and the way it relates to our theme. Caroline.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Gabriel, for inviting me and having me. Hi, everyone. I'm actually Dr. Caroline Khene from East Xhosa surname. My husband is South African. So that's my surname. I thought I would give a bit of a presentation from my experience and my research. If I can just tell you a little bit about my background and my research. My background is in what you would call ICT for development. So in the sense of how we can support international development in what people know as global South context, whether you are in Africa, Asia, Europe, or the Americas. And my topic sort of specialized then later on digital citizen engagement, because we found that the voice of citizens was lacking in many circumstances, leading to a growth in corruption and poverty, when so many opportunities exist for growth and development, which we've seen and we want to nurture, given that citizens can have a voice. So the project I've been co-directing initially and now directing is called Mobile Social Accountability Monitoring, MobiSAM for short. And it's a project that supports service delivery in Southern African countries. We have two projects, actually. Our first project looked at service delivery, basic service delivery, like your water, sanitation, and electricity. And then we had a sister project that emerged from our learnings called MobiSAFAIDS, which focuses on access to adolescent sexual productive health rights in the Southern African context. So I wanted to just start this, or to give this presentation based on responsible use and access to digital citizen engagement, because when it comes to health data, when it comes to adolescents, and when it comes to the need for accessing sexual reproductive health rights, there's a lot of sensitivity associated with it, but there's also a need for it. So there needs to be some sort of balance. Okay. So I'll start off by just speaking, I'll try to speak quite briefly about digital citizen engagement and adolescent sexual reproductive health services. Then I'll go into talking about responsible research innovation and civic tech pluralism, and then look at MobiSAFAIDS, which is our project, our sister project, and what the term "the other" means, which you see is often forgotten in such projects when you're looking at global South context or Southern African context. And then finally introduce ethics by continued process when you're implementing such projects. So if we look over, apologies about this, if you look at adolescent sexual reproductive health rights in Southern Africa, you see that it's become quite a significant issue and a challenge and problem that's emerging. And a lot of governments are worried about the reemergence and prevalence of HIV among the youth, the future of such countries. In one typical example in South Africa, the teenage pregnancy during COVID-19 doubled during the pandemic because of access to key services. Issues around sexual gender-based violence continue to grow because of a lack of protection of youth and young girls as young as 9 years old. And so when we don't get to hear the voices of these particular individuals when it comes to accessing key services, then they kind of go ignored. And so we wanted to introduce a platform working with an NGO, SAFAIDS, that has been doing work in this region for many, many years, that allow the youth to anonymously report on certain issues in accessing key services. So why is it important to give that voice, among the youth? If we think of digital citizen engagement, we think of reporting by individual citizens to maybe an individual person, a government official, a nurse. And this kind of feedback, if you look at the left side and orange side, kind of remains undisclosed and is quite individual. Then we have on the blue side, on the other side, where we have civil society trying to work on behalf of citizens to sort of advocate for changes in access to health services. But they're not really getting the severity of the issue because they only get to hear from certain groups or certain individuals. And so you cannot really understand how severe the issue is. So we're trying to bring together those two voices for collective action based on the data that's collected over time. It's interesting, the slides kind of came out weird, but anyway, so just talking about the MobiSAFAIDS initiative and the countries we're working with South Africa, Lesotho, Eswatini, now recently changed from Swaziland to Eswatini, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. And these were 6 pilot countries that implemented a program called Transforming Lives. So the technology wasn't the center of the whole program, but it was just one part of the actual pillars that the program was built on. And it mainly focused on supporting their social accountability monitoring of services. So that kind of data can be taken up to various meetings and policy forums to influence government in actually changing things. And how the actual platform actually works, the application, it's both desktop and mobile based. So you have here the youth actually reporting, submitting an issue they've observed. Maybe they do not, maybe there was an issue of bias from the nurse because the young girl who's 9 years old approached her about accessing contraceptives, and obviously there are taboos around that. Or it could be that someone had a gender-based violence experience and they did not receive urgent care. These are the realities that are faced. So it's very important to be able to submit these observations, which are then accessed by a health facility administrator that then escalates the issue to the key service provider that has to provide feedback, or in emergency circumstances, have that kind of private contact to address an urgent issue. But the important thing about this is that this kind of data is collected over time to sort of visualize the issues that are experiencing and emerging in particular regions and communities, because government has understood that, yes, we need to allow these services to be accessible to adolescents, but when it comes to putting it into action, that it's a different story is told. So government says we want to see the evidence that this is the case. So collecting this data over time actually has an impact. But then we also need to ask ourselves the question, okay, the data collection and data use have ethical and data rights implications on citizens' data, adolescents' data. So how do we make sure we're protecting people, at the same time empowering them to be able to voice their needs? So that's then the responsible data comes into context, where you need to prioritize and respond to the ethical, legal, social, privacy-related challenges. That's what we're exploring with some of my colleagues in the CCSR and Rhodes University. And there's also the question of who defines and how do we define what is ethical? So in Europe, I know there are a lot of trends around the issues of emerging technology, privacy bias. But what is bias here may not be the same in a different context. What is more important in terms of the needs for services may be different in relation to what people are willing to let go in order to access urgent services. So that needs to be clearly defined by the people that matter. And that's why when we're looking at responsible research innovation, it's quite a powerful framework. I know it's quite Eurocentric, and a lot of the arguments have been that it's because it was produced in Europe, it may not be easily interpreted for Southern African context. However, this powerful framework talks about the aspect of continued process when you're introducing innovation. And what we've been doing with my colleagues in the CCSR is trying to identify those aspects of anticipation, reflection, engagement, and action, and how we actually interpret and define them in the context of the project that we've been involved with since 2012. And then we also look at civic tech pluralism, where we start to talk about the others that matter in this whole process. The others in relation to whose perspectives matter. Is it the researcher, the academic, the research institution, the government official? Or is it that individual community member, that young adolescent, the mother, the father? Are their voices being heard in relation to how this application would best serve them? And so when we're looking at actors in such a process, we have our leading NGO that defines how the project should work. We have our civic tech implementer, which is the researcher, the university. And then the green side, we have our grassroots or community level individuals. And what I did deliberately is I wanted to show you the size of these actors and the voices that they have in the process. And you see typically what has happened, the decisions around the project have mainly been the blue and so the civic tech implementer and the leading NGO. But the voices of the youth-led civil society organizations, the youth themselves, the SAM champions who are youth as well, representing the adolescent youth in the community and other service providers, their voices are not significantly heard in this particular process. And it's something that is very, very common in many projects. So I'm just going to conclude there, where we're trying to continue to explore the application relevance of RRI and pluralism together, as well as other aspects to take into consideration when we're looking at platforms and the public when it comes to being online. We also want to look at the issue of power dynamics, who decides how things should happen and emerge in relation to the use of digital technology, and also the importance of being sensitized to these pluralistic experiences in civic tech initiatives in the Global South. And I'll end there. Thank you.
feel free to use the comment section to put your question in, and I will read your question for you. But I'd like to hand over now to Dr. Karthikeyan Kandan, who is Associate Professor in Mechanical Engineering in the Institute of Engineering Sciences in the School of Engineering and Sustainable Development in the Faculty of Computing, Engineering and Media at De Montfort University. And Dr. Kandan's expertise is in the fields of mechanics, of composites and assistive technologies. So over to you, Karthik.
Good afternoon, everyone. So for this roundtable conference, I would like to discuss about the opportunities at the circular and digital intersection. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to throw a few concepts where the digital technology could be more useful, and then maybe we can reduce the time to product, and that's sort of an idea. So what I'm going to do then, I will present a case study on upcycled plastic brick to see whether that opportunities, presenting, for example, the circular economy and digital intersection will have the huge role to play in future. So the outline for the presentation is, first I will briefly describe about the circular economy, what I'm talking about, and then also why I'm talking about the circular economy that linked to the industrial 4 environment. Then after the brief introduction, then I will try to introduce a real physical problem in an engineering point of view, what you're trying to solve, and then I'll give you the case study on the upcycled plastic brick. And then finally, I'll link back the circular economy and the industrial 4 environment, how the digital technologies could be useful to achieve a physical solution much quicker. That is the whole point of the argument for this presentation. The circular economy is nothing but is sort of a fundamental idea is try to reuse, repair, and redistribute, refurbish, and remanufacture the materials. Basically, the idea being that you're trying to reduce the pollution and net zero carbon and everything is basically environmental point of view. So this one again, this particular concept is recently gaining momentum. The reason being that there is a other concept is called industrial 4 environment. So this is, probably you might have heard about just-in-time manufacture, in the sense that given that the digital tools and technology these days are available to make it, for example, Internet of data and Internet of people and Internet of services and Internet of things, basically informations are there, and how we can make use of this information to produce products faster and quicker, and also probably reduce the sort of harmful gases and things like, for example, the environmental things. So that's the idea behind it. So for that to happen, this range of tools has been identified. For example, VR, additive manufacturing, cybersecurity, and big data, and so a range of digital tools. I don't know how to go one by one. So that each will have the functionality. So here the argument is that we are trying to use the digital tools and technologies to make the Industry 4 environment to produce a product which could be kind of used to promote the circular economy, in the sense that the idea being we design and develop products such are they are much more efficient, and also reduce the time from the concept to the production, and also reducing the environmental impact on those. So that's the idea behind those two concepts where the digital technology could be useful. So the physical problem, what I'm going to talk about is for example, the affordable housing. So the housing is the problem in everywhere. It's not only the developing nation and also developing countries and the poor countries. Here the picture shows that a housing crisis at the upcoming economies. Basically, here you can see the background. You will have the high-rise buildings, and then you have shelters, and you have the biofuels and things like that. It's not really a sanitized environment. So there is a white paper regarding the the housing crisis. For the fact that UN Habitat says there are 3 million people, so 3 billion people. They need accessible housing, and around if you wanted to meet the target by 2030, we need to build house, for example, 96,000 of new and affordable housing units for every day. And And additionally, there are people, for example, approximately 100 million people worldwide are homeless. That is, 1 in 4 people live in harmful conditions. So the main aim is to, we'll have to, the basic, the need is to, we need to provide the access to the housing. That is a precondition so that people get employment and education, health, and social services and things like that. So for that, WHO recommended, World Health Organization recommended the 5 different criteria. Need to, like for example, in terms of the building the affordable housing, so crowding, we need to minimize the crowding, and indoor cold, insulation. That is where the upcycle plastic brick. I'm going to present the case study, and again the indoor heat and home and safety, injuries and accessibility and things like that. These are the sort of a guidelines, which is the bare minimum guidelines we need to meet for building the affordable housing. So then we looked at, for example, if you want to build affordable housing, let's look at the nature and then see how we can, whether we can learn some lessons so that we can replicate the lesson to build affordable housing. So this is a short video about the, Baya weaver bird, which built a house.
Stringent security checks and expert craftsmanship. With summer fast approaching, the male Baya weaver bird takes the initiative to build ingeniously designed cozy homes just to warm it and to house the to-be-born children. In the half-finished stage, when the nest looks like a tube with an open swollen pouch at its base, the male flaps its wings to catch the attention of females passing. The female inspects these nests and accepts the male's advances only if she is satisfied with the nest and its location. Once this romantic bond is struck, the male goes on to complete the nest by building an entrance tube, and the couple lives and breathes happily thereafter. If you spot one nest, you are likely to spot several more, as weaver birds like to nest in groups. Normally, weaver birds sport a dull yellow color with black markings and look like sparrows at a glance. As breeding season approaches, the males grow brighter in color, with the yellows and the black markings becoming more prominent. Weaver birds' nests look neat and well finished, as if made by an expert craftsman, without straws sticking out. The nests have a definite design that includes a looped attachment to the branch, a roof, the egg chamber, antechamber, and entrance tube, downwards to avoid entry of predators. The Baya weaver may also build a sunshade in the form of an overhanging projection.
Well, here the idea is trying to study the bird's nest and then see whether we're able to replicate using the digital tools and technologies so that we can build the affordable housing. So we got hold of one of the nest, and then we did the CT scanning, it's X-ray scanning, which normally we do, to get to know the internal architecture of the nest. And here's the chamber showing the architecture, the egg chamber, and the normal chamber showing that. So here the idea is whether we can able to reproduce those, using the digital tools. Now I'm going to slightly talk about different things. So the bird builds, fantastic, nest. But there's other problem, for example, using the, a lot of plastic waste and things like that, which is lying around for harming the environment. So here you can see one picture from, for example, nowadays, there is a plastic pollution. There's a huge amount of plastic pollution. I've highlighted a few of the things where it's like, for example, there's a huge plastic waste. Like only approximately 10% we could able to recycle. The rest things go to the landmine. And then again, it's even it end up with the bird nest. There's a picture showing, the blue color. The one is the man-made fiber. So 1 in 3 bird nests include the man-made debris. So here's the idea is that the plastic pollution is a huge problem. And then see whether you can link, for example, the affordable housing and also the plastic pollution, and also getting the biomimicry sort of an ideas from the bird nest, and see whether you could be able to link them together. That's the idea behind it. So in addition to this, the plastic waste with general plastic waste, given the pandemic also, produced a lot of additional plastic waste. For example, as of August of 23rd, approximately 4.5 to 15.1 million tons of plastic waste has been produced to make a personal protective equipment. It could be a gloves and test kit in the hospital environment, so packaging things and like that. So those things, they end up, they end up in the landmine, and they will be polluting the most of the 10 big rivers in the world. And then again, there's going to be a huge problem. It's kind of an added burden in terms of the plastic waste due to the pandemic impact. So here the idea is how we can relate those. For example, we need to build the affordable housing. We need to build for example, we need to reduce the plastic pollution. And then the idea is that whether we can get the inspiration from the biomimicry, like a bio-inspired innovation, and then we can combine them together to make the affordable housing. So this is a solution we call them upcycled plastic brick. So again, the video showing how we did the upcycled plastic brick. We created a plastic brick made from the household waste that can be approximately 10 times better insulation than the conventional clay brick. It's inspired from the bird nest. So we look at the bird nest, and then we have some perfect microclimate inside the chamber. So we try to replicate those architecture while we are 3D printing the plastic brick, so that then we're able to get the approximately 10 times better insulation than the clay brick. First, we take the plastic waste. So for example, there could be a plastic bottles, food packaging, coffee cup, lids, and also domestic plastic being used. To produce one plastic plate, we need to use up to 20 1 liter bottle. Was also cleaned with the needle machine. So then we make the pallets to use it in the extruder machine to produce the filament, which we use to the 3D printer. And we use 3D printer to make the exact architecture within the brick. And then the brick can be tested in the hot box calorimeter. So we make two chambers, one cold side and hot side, and we put the mask in the middle. The heat will go from warm side to cold side. Then we measure the heat flux and also temperature in both the chamber, and that really calculate the so-called U value, and then we thermal insulation. Now we know they're making the plastic brick from the recycled material. The next step is to go and do the large-scale testing. For example, the UV resistance and the fire resistance, everything. And then we're trying to use them in a prototype building, one in Nigeria and one in Leicester, so that we can get the field data in real time. So that is the short video about the plastic brick or upcycled plastic brick, what we come up with. So the link between the digital tools here is that from the concept, what we learned from the biomimicry structure from the BioWeaver nest, so we were able to use the 3D printing as one of the digital tools to make a range of architecture. So it could be like as a prismatic, so that we can able to generate a scaling law, so that we can understand how the architecture plays a huge role in terms of the thermal insulation. So you can have a range of things, for example, triangle, square, and all sort of things. Then we could able to understand and also develop the mathematical model. So this helped us to understand, to compare the regular bricks, for example, clay brick and concrete brick, and also the silicon coursing brick, different traditional bricks available. And then we could able to achieve with the one sort of our brick, we could able to achieve the so-called U value, the thermal transmitted value, that is going to be 0.25. So here the idea is that the digital technologies help us to move things forward much more quickly, because otherwise getting the traditional method to manufacture this kind of exotic architecture will be the huge problem. And that brings to the so-called Industrial 4 enabled construction. So the construction industries are really using traditional ways to fabricate it. Given that Industry 4 environment and smart housing, smart factories and things like that, so we see the upcycled plastic brick could be used on-site fabrication, robotic building, for example, the picture on the left, having printing the cement, which we could replace with the recycled plastic mixed with the concrete, so that we can able to build on-site things, so that we can reduce the embodied carbon energy. On the right-hand side, here's a range of technologies, including the robotics and the humans and things like that. So that was proposed to build the sort of on-site fabrication of the construction of the house or building. So that is only possible with the digital tools, basically. So with that one, I'd like to conclude that digital tools is a really remarkable thing that makes you to, from the concept to the product, the time is required. It's going to be used, and also it's going to produce, sort of more meaningful, information such that we can reduce the environmental, crisis, basically.
Thank you, Karthik. Our third speaker is Professor Jinsong Shen, who is Professor of Textile Chemistry and Biotechnology in the School of Fashion and Textiles in the Faculty of Arts, Design and Humanities at De Montfort University. Professor Shen's expertise is in the field of textile engineering and materials. Over to you, Jim.
Okay, thanks, Gabriel. Okay, my topic will be around the textile coloration and printing. I think, as we know, textile manufacturing and the fashion industry are changing as a result of digitalization. So here, I'm going to talk about digital laser technology we developed for textile coloration and surface patterning, so which could be alternative to textile printing. The next slide, please. Before talking about novel digital technologies, I needed to mention that conventional textile screen printing, like low-trace screen printing or flat screen printing, are still more favorable than other printing techniques, especially for printing large quantity of fabrics. However, the initial setup cost is high. This is because separate screens are required for each separate color. In order to produce accurate color pattern, all the screens have to be carefully and precisely registered in the printing machine to make sure all the color match up perfectly. So you can see highly skilled printers are required. If we change in color, we have to clean out the printing paste in each screen. If we change in pattern, and we need to replace the whole set of the screens for new pattern. So you can see there's a high operation cost. So after printing, normally post-treatment like steam or high temperature curing for color fixation, and followed by washing to remove the printing paste. So that's required. So you can see this is a lengthy process for textile screen printing. Next slide, please. So in the sector of textile printing, digital inkjet printing on textile fabrics has been introduced and also established themselves very quickly, providing more opportunities. So similar to standard inkjet printing, so a digital file of the patterns is loaded into printer and directly to be printed on the fabrics without use of the screens. So inkjet printing actually has many benefits and advantages in terms of sustainability, speed, flexibility, and also new business models. So what we found is inkjet printing actually use less dye stuff and also reduce the waste of materials, save water and energy. So that's reflect on the sustainabilities. Because of the short processing from pattern design to print on the fabric, so this printing technique actually can make rapid response to changing in trends and also short lead time for delivering products to market. However, the digital inkjet printing still have some issues to overcome or to further develop. For example, the risk of blockage and the damage of printing nozzles, and also pre-treatment required for certain type of textile materials like wool fabric, prior to printing. So next slide, please. So recently, digital laser technology has been developed very quickly for textile applications. We know laser is a very powerful tool for cutting or etching different materials. But here, we can control laser power and energy for modification of textile surface rather than breaking down textile materials. Here I show you current commercial application using laser to remove surface color on the jeans to produce pattern and also fading effect. So I'll show you the video. Play the video, yeah. So you can see this is a direct dry process, very fast and eco-friendly. So excellent reproducibilities. So any digital file of the patterns can be produced. Okay, next slide. Our De Montfort University collaborated with Loughborough University on an AHRC funded project for developing laser technology for textile surface coloration and patterning. So you can see the images on this slide show the color patterns on the fabric can be achieved by laser-assisted dyeing technique we call para-dyeing. So this is using laser direct apply the color on the surface of the fabric without using printing screen and printing paste. So it's a very fast process and saving water and energy. So if you look at the bottom left image, you can see para-dyeing can produce very fine line with high resolution, which cannot be achieved by traditional screen printing. Next slide. We also control laser process to modify surface property of wool fabrics in the term of dyeabilities and dye uptake. So through the subsequent dyeing process, the color patterns can be produced as shown in the left image. You can see the lasered area actually have higher dye uptake than unlasered area. So that leading to the patterns created. And in the middle image, we show that laser process can remove the surface fiber from the milled fabric or freeze fabric to create 3D relief surface or 3D relief effect. Next slide. We also explore the laser process to produce fading or whitening effect on loom state linen fabric by removing the surface of brownish color or impurities to achieve pattern. So you can see the lasered, you can see unlasered area in the circle still remaining original brownish color. Then the rest of the laser area becoming much whiter. So that's leading to unique laser marking or fading effect. Next slide. Another application of the digital laser process is to achieve molding and 3D pattern effect. So the laser was applied as a heat setting on elastic fabric or thermoplastic fabric. In this process, the fabric was stretched in hold under tension. Then the laser scan on the stretched fabric according to the pattern. Then after laser process, then the fabric was released from tension. then you can see that 3D molding effect on the fabric was set and remained. That's because unlayered area, they can return from the stretch to their original shape, but layered area will remain and as set as stretched form. So eventually we have that bubbles 3D effect on the fabric. Okay, so that's all. That's my quicker presentation to show how the digital technology influence textile manufacturing to improve sustainability, creativity, and meet consumers' demands. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jin Song. Our final speaker is Professor Irka Boyton, who is Professor of Cybersecurity and Head of the School of Computer Science and Informatics in the Faculty of Computing, Engineering and Media at De Montfort University. Over to you, Irka.
Thank you, Gabriel. Following the talks from my colleagues, I think I'm going to give a slightly more general talk. I haven't got a concrete product that I'm looking at. I'm looking at what happens in the background. I'm looking at cybersecurity, as Gabriel already indicated. That's my job title, and I think I'm looking at data in the first place. Data sits centrally behind every development in digital innovation. When we have data, that creates potential and it creates problems. If in drawing a slight analogy with Karthik's story, data is maybe like plastic. Some of the time it functions as a building block, and some of the time it functions as a waste material that can do great harms. So there are probably two big aspects to data that come into all these stories of digital innovation, it's my job to worry, right? Cybersecurity is a thoroughly thankless area to be in, because most of the time when you produce something constructive, it is still something constructive that stops something bad from happening. And some of the times you can make that look like something good in itself. But most of the time we worry about risks. So if we're looking at for example an Industry 4.0 factory, like Karthik was sketching, with Internet of Things control elements in there, and the idea that it can be remotely controlled. And yes, from the pure cybersecurity perspective, we're looking at it and thinking that there's control data going on here, right? This system is potentially connected to the internet, or in any case, it's remotely wired up in a way to control it, and that creates vulnerabilities. It means that we need to protect the data, and not so much because the data is the control data that there is confidential, secret, whatever. What signals are being given to the factory is not really secret information. But in this case, it's what we in the security world would call an integrity issue. If someone gets in there and disturbs the data, then they can destroy the outcome one way or another, or in the worst case, as has happened in some real cyber attacks in the world, like with Iranian power stations and things like that, they can actually destroy things by running machines in a way that's controlling machines in a way that will break the machines down. So even in that almost innocuous situation where the data itself is not of high value, having the power to change it is something that we need to protect. The next thing to look at is when it's data controlling a situation, like in the last two presentations we've seen, where we know integrity is an issue. When the data turns into data about situations, turns into data about people in particular, then the picture gets worse. China just recognized, I saw in the news today, data as the sort of the third source of the third big resource after money and labor to go into production, and that's a fair thing to be saying. Data is not just the new nuclear waste in the sort of plastic-like sense or whatever. It's also the new gold, or whatever you want to call it. It's the new oil, in the sense that whoever has control of the data is automatically a powerful nation or a powerful Silicon Valley company. And there's the word power, particularly when it's data about people. Power comes into the picture. You can, by knowing things about people in general, you have control over people. And here I'm not saying anything that Caroline hasn't already hinted at in some sense, because of course, if it's about data about people, then privacy sort of issues come to light. Privacy, data protection. And in our cybersecurity research group, privacy is an important area that we look at as well, from a slightly more technological angle than our friends in the computing social responsibility group that Caroline belongs to. In the sense that we try to see whether we can technologically manipulate, protect or discover risks against privacy, including by observing computer systems intensely, like in a recently produced book by my colleague Isabel Wagner, or by systematically studying privacy and security risks hand in hand. And of course, confidentiality is the big privacy risk that stands out there. Third parties might get the data. What happens then? Well, Caroline was looking at sexual health data, which stands out as being very, very sensitive health data. Everybody knows we need to protect that really well, but it's not just confidentiality issues. It's the control issues. It's the knowledge issues that follow from it, which mean that we always need to look at who has the data and what could they potentially do with it beyond what they've already advertised that they want for it. So it's not just privacy. It has cybersecurity, protecting the data from third parties in there as an element, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that to the use of data in the way of controlling systems, controlling people. And it's world power, and in terms of looking at the global south, that raises questions as well. So if we set up infrastructures in the global south for digital innovation in one form or another, and we make sure while we're at it that these infrastructures relate closely to what we think, or maybe probably don't think anymore, Google and Facebook and the likes provide us for free, then by doing so, we also increase the power of such companies and that there are definite agendas in that area, like when Facebook was trying to set up free internet through India, which had a very limited view of the internet that favored Facebook greatly. So there are definite questions alongside data streams being created, and then power issues that follow from that. I think that's probably a good point to stop.
Thank you, Ilke. Well, I have questions for our speakers, but I want to also reassure people who are putting questions into the comments that we're going to take those questions as well. But I'd like to start off taking the chair's privilege by asking Caroline if she would care to follow up on a point she made and check that I understood this correctly, Caroline. You seemed to say that what counts as bias and what counts as an acceptable trade-off between, say, privacy and the benefits of a digital service, that might be different in different contexts. That balance might be different in Africa than elsewhere. Did I understand you right about that, Caroline? And if so, can you say a bit more about what those differences are?
Yeah, so I could speak as a researcher that was previously based in South Africa and looking at the main concerns that people were focusing on, which was social development, economic development. How can we move forward? Because there's a lot that needs to change. And then coming to the UK, and it's all about protecting people's data rights. And it almost, in my field of ICT for development and even digital citizen engagement, it's almost as though the trend has sort of moved away from the idea of supporting citizens in voicing their opinions to protecting citizens from surveillance and by government and so on. And those two, protecting citizens is just as important as empowering citizens. And I think there just needs to be some sort of balance that needs to be understood and respected, because I think now that element of empowerment has been sidelined, and there's still a lot of areas that, technology can influence. Of course, now it's about understanding how to do it in a responsible way, making sure people actually get empowered. So it's just like social media. I don't let my kids use social media, so because I can see how powerful it is in terms of affecting the way they interact with their friends. But there is value when they feel more empowered to understand how to be assertive in how they handle what goes on social media and what should not go on social media. You know what I mean? So
I do.
That whole power balance is just as important. Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. That's an extraordinary remark. I'm extremely impressed that you simply don't let your kids go on social media. Because that brings me to my next point, which was that, and people may not agree with me about this, but it seems to me that a lot of the benefits of digitalization in the West have been essentially trivial, have been not worth having in some ways. I mean, some have been wonderful, some have been amazingly empowering, but the amount of hours that young people spend simply harming their own mental health by nonsense on their phones seems to me to be not at all empowering, and therefore not something you'd want to see spread around the world. You wouldn't want to have even more people addicted to the nonsense that is social media. I'm willing for people to push back against that argument, but I wanted to link that then to something Karthik was talking about, which is about half the world's population lacking adequate housing. The other one I would connect with that, I think, is a similar figure of half the world's population not having access to clean water. There's something very strange that millions of these people, possibly hundreds of millions of them, have internet access, but not housing and not clean water, which is an extraordinary example of the unevenness of the way technology has spread around the world. Would you agree with that, Karthik, or anybody else who wants to jump in, that's actually bad? We need to actually think about that as something that economic systems don't seem to be able to smooth out. I mean, it seems to me that many people have come to the conclusion that capitalism as a world economic system is acceptable if it's relatively even, if there's not these vast disparities in people's access to the wonders of progress. So anybody want to jump in on that? But Karthik first, I'll invite. What do you think about this idea?
Yeah, I agree, Gabriel, on this one. So really, what I see is that digital tools and technologies, they're increasing. They are really tremendously moving forward. But for example, the other problem which requires the cross-sector intervention, it's not really simply engineering can do basically, or any other other discipline can do. It requires a multidisciplinary intervention. Again, if you are able to use different information, direct is the gold, data is gold. If you could, we could able to turn around, at least minimize the harmfulness basically. But unfortunately, the like internet and things, and it's moving way ahead than the sort of the improvement what we like to see in terms of clean water and the life and health and well-being and all sort of other things basically.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I'm seeing this, the top of the discussion we're having here links very well actually with the research theme also of peace, justice, peace and social justice, and also to health and well-being. And that brings me actually to something you were talking about, Jinsong, regarding dyeing. That is the colouring of cloth by chemicals. Am I right in thinking that that's actually a big pollution problem in places like Bangladesh that have a large garment manufacturing industrial base? So the pollution of rivers by those chemical dyes is significant, and the technology you're talking about might actually help with that. Did I follow that correctly, Jinsong?
Yes, I think the challenge for textile industry is the to improve the sustainability of textile processing and reduce the consumption of chemicals, water, energy. And so all the digital technology, if we can help to improve the efficiency of colorations or reduce the waste materials. So that's probably quite important. So all the new technology we're developing, looking for more sustainable and environmental friendly, able to saving water, energy, of course, is a reduction of impact on the environment.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Thinking about then what kinds of investment and what kinds of industries countries have. Ilka, I was thinking when you mentioned China, or someone's going to mention China sooner or later, it has to come up. You talked about China recognizing data as, did I catch you right, that the aside was it labor and capital plus data are the resources for industrialization? What about the Belt and Road Initiative, which I should say to people who don't know, China spends an awful lot of money loaning essentially to other countries for investment in development of industrial infrastructure. Ports can be built, railroads, highways can be built. What should we think about that in connection with this question? What should we think about the Belt and Road Initiative, this enormous investment that China is making in Africa, amongst other places? Is it something to be concerned about? Is it something to be quite sanguine about? I mean, I've heard people, I was surprised to see Yanis Varoufakis from Greece being very sanguine about the Belt and Road Initiative, and actually China's influence is largely benign, he was claiming, which as a Marxist economist was a very surprising thing for me, I thought, for him to say. What's your view about this, about China's investment in developing nations? Ilka, or indeed anyone else who wants to jump in after Ilka?
Can I pass to Caroline? She's lived in at least 2 more African countries than I have, if not 3.
Please, Caroline.
Can you actually just summarize the question a bit for me, Gabriel?
Yes.
I was focusing on Ilka answering it.
If you think the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is significant for our discussion, could you say a little bit about your knowledge of it? And I'm particularly asking, is it something that we should be worried about in relation to the development of countries that are relatively underdeveloped industrially?
The Belt and Road is actually the first time I've heard about in this session. What is the Belt and Road about?
It's a very large-scale investment policy. It's the main plank of China's overseas policy towards other countries, and it's a large amount of investment in developing nations, in developing infrastructure, typically mortgaged against resources, so that there are quite a few African states who have large mortgages with China. But what it's building is things we want. We want highways, we want railroads, we want ports, we want the development of particularly transport networks. When Inka mentioned, well, actually, could we broaden it to, well, because of your experience with NGOs, Caroline, with foreign investment? How important is foreign investment across Africa compared to, as we say, African investments in their own, African states' investment in their own infrastructure? What do you think is the important things for us to understand about that, Caroline?
I think it's really valuable to have the voice of Africans in these big decisions. And I'm not talking about African leaders, because we have quite a number of not so great corrupt leaders, and we have some good leaders that have, good initiatives going forward. But obviously, when you don't have citizens aware of what's going on, you can't have them empowered. But what I've seen in South Africa, China has invested quite a lot in South Africa, but what has also been growing in South Africa is a civil society movement and the influence of media and voice and opinion in addressing issues. Like, I think recently was Shell, I was Shell, don't want to say, was going to do some blasting along the Wild Coast. And that decision was made, by government. But with the influence of citizens, they managed to stop it. They started it, obviously killing wildlife. but the voice of citizens, media influence has grown significantly in South Africa over the past couple of years, especially with the issue of state capture and all of that. People are basically tired. But I also visited Zambia at some point, and I was quite amazed at the infrastructure investment, looking at the old airport in Zambia and the new one that China had just built. And, everywhere you go, you see the influence of business. But it's also quite worrying, because I also asked myself the question of how much influence did an African have in the decisions that are being made, and how much do they own? How much do they own it? And there's also quite a large, huge brain drain as well from the African continent because of frustrations from various intellectuals, business people, about what is happening and the lack of control in moving countries forward. So sometimes some of the things I say to myself is, if I can't change from the inside out, I'll change from the outside in. So that's what some people have started to do. But I will say it is very worrying to see what is happening in Africa. You just visit Zambia and Namibia, and you'll see for yourself.
Thanks, Caroline. I think we'll take some questions from our wider listenership. And the first one is from Edward Cartwright, who asks, and I'm trying to think, who should I address this to? The question is enough effort being made to factor in cybersecurity into design of new digital products? And if not, how to change the culture? I think that's fairly clearly directed in the first instance at Ilke. So I can ask you to take that one on. Can you see the question, or should I repeat it?
Thanks, Gabriel. I saw the question and grinned. The answer is obviously no. We have too many products and situations that have huge security risks in there. The glib answer to this is yes, we need to change. We need to change the culture. If only we had experts in incentives, and if DMU had an economics professor, for example, who knew a lot about cybersecurity, then maybe he could help us with these things. But that's a glib answer because Edward is one of those people himself. So I think it is changing the culture through incentives. There's some government law coming into place for IoT security devices, but I'm not sure how that's going to pan out with cheap devices being bought on eBay, imported from, shall I say, China again. Whether law can keep up with developments there, I'm not entirely sure. But I think economics can. Car manufacturers take recall very seriously. Well, there's elements of law supporting that as well. And of course, we as computer science, etc., educators have a responsibility as well to instill in our graduates that they have a responsibility for the things that they produce. Beyond not just that they're functionally entirely right, which is already a big step. Bug-free programs are too rare, but also that in terms of not being exploitable, being designed, being secure by design, being private by design, all those sort of things. So yeah, there's an educational responsibility there as well.
Thanks, Ilke. Would anybody else like to come in and comment on that question about cybersecurity and built-in safety? Any other of our roundtable members want to talk on that? Because I can think of how we can connect that to wider questions. I wanted to actually try and link that to questions of intellectual property, particularly in developing nations. And as Caroline says, the question of who exactly owns what, because we have one question about who owns the airport that's just been built if China's paid for the investment. But what about things that are actually created that are nebulous, that are intangible, the intellectual developments in developing nations, which obviously there are fewer patents are filed in developing nations than anywhere else. But there are also arguments about turning things that are found across the world into intellectual property. The idea of turning someone's DNA, if they happen to have immune resistance, into a patent, or turning some plant found in South America into a patent. But if nobody wants to jump in on that, I think I will take a question from the next question from our listeners. It's connected to this because it's about the digital divide in the past. But thinking of it across age groups, Nicola asks, well, says lots was made of the digital divide in the past, specifically on age. Do you consider that now this has shifted to those who are developed technologically versus those who are not? So has a simple age differential become rather more subtle regarding technological development? Who'd like to handle that? So who'd like to field that question? I'm going to appoint someone if I don't get a volunteer.
I'm trying to understand the developed technologically versus those that are not. What does developed technologically mean?
I understand Nicola's question. I may be wrong about this. I thought it was to do with understanding the technology, the digital divide between those who understand computers, essentially, and what we do with them, and those who don't. And that's actually a concern that I've had. I teach in a department, faculty of humanities, school of humanities, students who are extremely adept at using other people's software. They spend all day using other people's software. I haven't the faintest idea what software even is. And what I start with actually is digital texts. How can machines represent language? Which is something students know very little about. But I worry that we're kind of in the 18th century regarding language, in the sense that we've got a population that's very capable of reading in the old-fashioned sense. They can use what someone else has created, but not of creating for themselves. In the 18th century in England, a lot of people could read but not write. And I think we're in an analogous situation regarding digital technologies. A lot of people can consume but not create, or not create in the ways that I think are valuable, or that they would actually find useful. I wish we could actually have Nicola on, but don't think we can unmute Nicola to ask her to explain her question. But I think that's what Nicola's getting at, is that it's not simply an age divide, it's a technological adeptness divide. What do you think, Caroline?
I'm thinking that maybe this kind of question relates a lot to digital literacy. And it also depends on how you define digital literacy. So I mean, like, as you say, people can use technology, but they're not making the effort to create, technology. But maybe because they don't have that wider understanding of possibilities that can emerge from the use of it in their social spaces and so on and so forth. But if I look at the global South, you could say, I mean, there's a lot of mobile phone access has grown significantly. People can use technology, from rural areas. But when it comes to, using it effectively for a certain purpose, to sort of evoke change, then that has a question mark on it. So I did a study to try and differentiate. If you're looking at citizen engagement, you have the various platforms, people are not using them, but they're amazing. That's a issue that we've been facing. And we have what we call, civic digital literacy, understanding your rights and how to effectively participate using the platform to engage with other citizens. Then we also have government responsiveness literacy in terms of how they can actually effectively engage with what they're receiving as feedback from citizens, and also can, close that feedback loop and also feedback to citizens on how they can change things. So that is not existing. And so you have these amazing platforms, whether they're developed in the global north or wherever, but they're not being used, So there are a lot of issues around the term digital divide and how it's defined. It can mean so many things to different people. But I do understand. I think the main issue that exists in the global South, depending on whatever domain you're working with, is the issue of digital literacy.
Yeah. I invite Nicola to, if I completely misunderstood her point there, and that isn't what she was asking, I invite Nicola to post in the comments a refinement so I can repose the question more accurately to our speakers. But I'd like to ask either Jinsong or Karthik to think about this question that Caroline has raised regarding who owns these technologies and how they can be embedded in the places where they're used. Is it the case, either Jinsong or Karthik, that these are technologies developed in the West and the North that we bring to developing nations, or even developed nations? I mean, I think the colouring of fabrics you're talking about, Jinsong, seems relevant to countries that are not Western, but are neither described as developing nations. Do these technologies, as it were, belong where they get made and are given, or are there things that can be done in the places where they are to be used that embed these technologies more firmly? Who'd like to take that, either Jinsong or Karthik?
Probably just a few words. I was thinking, digital technology developing so quickly and in all kind of fields, especially, communication at the moment is global communications, and you can see the trade across the whole the world. So some advanced developed countries, they implement that new technology, digital technology, very quickly, and compare with rural area or developing country, they might left a little bit behind and not as same advanced as the developed country. But I think, for the benefit for whole world, we got the the trade, got the communications. So we need to help the country, to all the countries developing that digital communications very quickly. One of the example, if we look at the trade, quite a lot European country, they probably not doing manufacturing the garment itself, but they order a lot products from the low labor countries, the manufacturings. You can see, especially in pandemic, we are not going to travel quite a lot, but through their communications, when you order things, if you look at colors, we are quite depending on the digital technology to show the real color communication each other. So you can see if lack of the developing some of the digital technology in some country, it might be delay the trading or communications or any more difficulties between them. Yeah, okay, that's just my thought.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you, Jinsong. I want to take another question that's come in on the comments. This is from, I don't suppose this is a person's real name, X Fractal X. Also, I should say, Nicola has confirmed that we got her question right. That was what she wanted us to discuss. Thanks, Nicola. X Fractal X has a question for you, Irka. As our Internet of Things devices, cookies, etc., will know more about us than ourselves, do you think if they voted instead of us, we'd have a better and more democratic government? Slightly ironic question there, X Factor X. What do you make of it, Irka?
Yeah, to date, it's been in the news that educational establishments should not encourage people to criticize the government. So I won't make any comments about whether we could have a better and more democratic government or not. The question is not entirely serious, so I think I can circle around it a little bit. There is a little bit element of our data voting for us coming through slowly, because the UK government wants to introduce voter identification, which means that people who are in a more solid position to prove who they are, probably not through cookies, but through ID identity documents, will get to vote, and other people on the other side of an identity divide will not be, and that will change things. Do our IoT devices and cookies know more about us than ourselves? Fortunately, I think not. And actually, if you watch the news in Europe, cookies might even be, or tracking cookies might even be on their way out, because 3 or 4 of the data protection authorities in Europe have found that actually what we long thought, the sort of internet tracking, this and the selling of data about people's interests, cookie pop-ups and everything associated with is actually illegal. So I've got some hope that our cookies will only know what we did in our last session at the browser, and remember our user account name for us, and no longer remember things for lots of others instead.
Thanks, Ilke. If our devices or cookies were voting for us, it would have to be electronic voting. And I want to propose something actually to the whole group and see if I get any reaction. I want to propose that electronic voting is one of those things that proves the limits of digitization. That is, we have an example here of something that should never be digitized because it can never be safely digitized. Voting ought to be a hugely laborious operation that a government organizes. And if we make it simple and cheap, as digitization does, we undermine the very notion of voting, because if it's difficult to organize, if it's laborious, if it's paper intensive, as it is in most countries, it's very hard to fake. It's virtually impossible to fake an election as long as you have scrutiny of a paper-based process. And a digital process is much easier to undermine. I'm going to leave it. I'm sure Ilke's got a point of view on this, so I'm going to leave him out and just ask. And I realize I haven't prepared anybody here for this question, but I'd like you, as people with digital expertise, to give me your view on that proposition. Perhaps you think it's too extreme or naive. I'm going to start with Karthik. What do you think of that proposition that voting should always be laborious? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I prefer to go in-person voting. Probably, from my experience is that if you ask people to do remotely or digitally, probably just they don't take a moment to think and then just click some buttons. But if you wanted to go in person, you may take a moment, because you are making a personal effort to go to the voting booth, and therefore you like to think about, who is the candidate, what I'm going to support, is there anything I can relate to, something like that. So most of the time, the digital votes are like, for example, even in a class-based system, for example, if you make a survey saying, do you need any help, or do you have anything to say about this, and stuff like that, it's very easy, yes or no, or in a slider. But most of the time, either they don't do it, just only get like 30% response, and also the response is really kind of here and there. You can't really make a sense out of it, whether they actually need more support or not. Basically, that's one question you wanted to answer. So I guess that's my personal view, though, in the sense that probably these the important decisions has to be made as a person, and then they need to have a moment to think about it.
Thank you. That's a very good point I hadn't thought of. I suppose where I was coming from was the falsifiability of the faking of voting results. And my fear is that developing nations might be tempted to buy electronic voting systems as a solution to getting cheap voting systems, but in fact cheap but very flawed voting systems. Let me ask Caroline, do you have a view on this?
So I was thinking at what stage of the voting and elections process, because we do have cases where at some stage it becomes data and data is open to a whole lot of things, you see. So even if we had the papers there, it can still get spoiled. And I know, a lot of countries do it, whether you're global north or global south. Can you really trust the voting process as a whole? So, I think you need to look at it more holistically in terms of the whole process. And I still don't trust anything electric, even though it's my field. But, a lot needs to go into thinking how to make the whole process secure. And then maybe we can start talking about the possibilities of getting rid of paper. But I can't even imagine a world being fair. So, in that sense, so I don't even know if the paper way is still not fair anyway. There's still a lot of corruption. Yeah. So how can we use digital to make sure that the corruption doesn't even happen with the paper? So I'm going round and round in circles. There are a lot of questions to be asked.
Thank you. No, I share all of your concerns. Thank you very much. Jinsong, can I put you on the spot with this question about digital voting as an expertise in this area? well, not that particular area, but as a person expert in digital methods, do you have a view on this, or have you not thought of it before?
No, I haven't thought of that.
Do you have no view at the moment?
I don't know. I'll probably not
That's all right.
answer your
No, I knew I was putting people on the spot because I hadn't said in advance I was going to ask this. But I bet Irka's got an on-the-spot opinion or not. What do you think, Irka? Are Caroline and I worrying unnecessarily?
Of course not.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I don't know. Is a very respectable position in this area. There are few topics which polarize security researchers as much as whether electronic voting is something that's worth aiming for, right? So there are lots of top security experts that are highly respected who say you really shouldn't, because you haven't got the ways to check that it works. You lose by sticking it all in a computer instead of having it on pieces of paper. You lose a lot of chances for accountability and for verifiability. And then I've got some brilliant colleagues, Mark Ryan in Birmingham, Steve Schneider in Surrey, fantastic, brilliant guys, and they develop all sorts of electronic voting solutions, and they look halfway decent from my slightly less expert perspective. So, but they use tricks. They use tricks like probably the only legitimate useful application for blockchains, where every vote gets published in a way that a person having made the vote can verify that it is their vote, and that nobody in the world can verify what way they voted, and that they can't even that they can't even prove to third parties which way they voted. Which is an essential property, because you also want to defend against a scenario where an electronic voter has a gun held to their head to say you need to vote this way or that. So non-coercibility. There's all sorts of fascinating security stuff going around there, and for limited applications, for applications where it's not life or death, I think electronic voting is perfectly acceptable. If the union wants electronic voting in order to ballot for a strike, then I think that the technology is good enough. Whether you would whether you would do elections in a country with any sort of degree of corruption or government wanting to eliminate oversight is an entirely different question.
Yeah, I thank you, Irka. I think the one aspect of that I'd push back against your friends and colleagues who are quite happy with electronic voting is this question of accountability to the people. If it requires understanding the blockchain to be happy that this is fair, then that eliminates a lot of people who don't understand the blockchain. Everybody understands marking an X on a slip of paper and it being in a box that gets counted. You look like you were shaking your head like you want to come back on that, Irka. What I'm saying is, do not systems have to be intelligible to their citizens in order to be really just? Irka.
I think the short answer is no. We want our cars to be secure in some way, but we don't expect every driver to be able to understand the safety analysis that goes into the design of the onboard computer. So that's the level of understanding of blockchain that I think you're talking about. So I think understanding, being able to verify that a safety or a security argument holds is probably an elite skill, and I'm relatively confident with that.
Sure. I don't want to draw this out, but I would come back with one slight quibble. I think almost all drivers have a basic understanding of the automobile. They've got a general idea, and I would contrast that with the blockchain, where a large number of people haven't the faintest idea what it is. I think most drivers do get how the machine works. But I won't, I'm sure you have an answer to that. But actually, I'm looking at the time, I realize I want to draw this to a close. I want to see if we can actually, first of all, I want to make sure anybody wants to, we've had some comments in the chat, but not actual questions. I haven't missed any questions. So if anybody who's made a comment wants to turn it into a question, please do that now. But I wanted to end, and I'll make sure we get your question if you can get it in the next minute or two into the chat. I wanted to actually end by asking whether we can, whether my opening question can receive an answer. And I don't need to be a very long answer. I didn't really want to hear whether you think it's true or not, that there's something unusual about the digital. There's something different about digital technologies that means these questions regarding development, economics, economic systems, citizenship, governance, all those sociological questions, are they changed fundamentally by the digital, or are they the same questions? I'll start with Caroline, if I may.
I'm still processing. Can you please say the first bit of the question again?
Yes. What I wanted to ask really was whether the digital realm, things being these insubstantial states of electronics, whether that fact of that much of our cultural, political, social life moving to this form changes the big questions in politics, in economics, in social relationships, in civil society, of all the big social questions that we have been thinking about for hundreds of years. Are they changed fundamentally by this change, by this switch to the digital? Are we looking at the same problems, or are we looking at a whole new set of problems that need to be thought out in new ways?
I think the latter, we sort of just need to rethink how the world is working now, but also be careful about the empowerment of individuals who use these technologies, and making sure that the technology or the giants do not control people, but people are well informed and empowered to make the decisions on how best it would work in their own social public space.
Thank you, Caroline. Karthik, can I take your answer next?
Yeah, so sort of still the fundamental or, the major, questions are still valid. But my opinion is that I think the digital tools they're trying to influence a lot. So I think that then the people think, for example, like, oh, take the particular search engine, it will give you the answer. So, how do I do this? Like, for example, how do I tie? Yes, of course, you can give you the answer. But something, the social economic issues and things like that, so where we need like multi-input is required. They may get influence, all sort of things from the digital tools, the media and things like that. So, that's for that influence a lot. But the problem for us is kind of how we educate people to make a judgment, to relay the influence. That education, I think, at these days, it started in the school these days. But for example, for our, kind of an age group and things, probably we're making our own judgment. But hopefully in future, probably people will be able to kind of distinguish between what is misinformation, what is not, and how I'm going to digest information, what I'm getting from the digital media and things like that. So in summary, I think the big social the questions remains in place, but my view is that there is a lot of influence. For example, it may say, oh, which one I need to tackle first? Say, for example, clean water problem or housing problem or environmental problems. Which one you need to tackle first, depending upon the influence what you get. That's going to be picked up by the policymakers and government and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion.
Thank you. I have no idea whether we get cut off at 2 o'clock or we actually get an extra minute or two. But I'm going to ask Jim to give us a brief answer to that. My big question about whether the digital changes our social questions.
For me?
Please.
Yeah, I think digital technology definitely help manufacturing, and I think improve the efficiency, and also provide quite a lot of opportunities, which is to especially for improved sustainability, reduce the waste materials.
Yeah.
I think efficiency is quite important, and also that's leading to new materials in the future. Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. And I want Erica to try and answer in no more than one sentence my enormous question.
Okay, speed, scale, availability, immediacy, available information altogether mean that the questions change the nature dramatically.
Thanks very much. That was one sentence. Marvelous. I want to thank our four speakers today in this roundtable. I want to thank our listeners on StreamYard for their engagement and their questions. And I want to say this has been an extremely successful event as far as I'm concerned. I've learned an awful lot, and there are going to be more of these roundtables. I want this research theme to be the source of discussion within the university, which we're going to then take outside of it. I'd like everyone to also keep an eye out for some events I'm going to publicize very shortly called the Living in a Digital Society Spotlight events, because we have some funding available for people who want to take these conversations forward, particularly where they involve, as we've had here, debates across the university. So thank you to everyone for attending today. I'm very grateful for your contributions, and I will draw this roundtable to an end now. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.